Hello and welcome to the Sci-AI Podcast. This is episode number 12. Today I have a great guest with me. His name is Jay Nanavati. Jay lives in England and works at AstraZeneca as an AI researcher. He has worked with Microsoft Research in Cambridge, England, in the healthcare intelligence domain, and had recently founded his own startup called RunCircle, which is based on conversational AI. How cool is that? So, welcome, Jay. Is this your right introduction, or do you want to add something more?
Hey, Vivek. It's nice to be on your podcast. Very excited. Thank you very much for having me. I think you covered pretty much everything. So, yeah, sounds good.
Fantastic. Great. All right. Let me start asking you some questions that I have for you today. So, what is mindful artificial intelligence or AI? Artificial intelligence understand the drug discovery process of what will be good for humans and what is not. For example, I read somewhere that with mindful AI, the algorithms can actually determine the efficacy of a drug far better than human scientists. How does it work actually? Or is it better data provided to an AI machine that somehow human scientists can't comprehend and come to a conclusion on? Or is there better AI models devised?
Yeah, so that's a very good question, and a very important one in this time, in this age of AI. So
Right.
I think I'll begin with deconstructing your question. It has many facets.
Sure.
So the way I think of mindful AI is it's very much in the same bucket as some other frameworks. So it's essentially a framework which is around fairness and responsible AI. So it's about, in a nutshell, handling bias. So bias comes in different forms. So there's data bias, there's algorithmic bias, there's also human bias. And essentially what mindful AI or responsible AI or fair AI tackles debiasing the models.
Right.
And allowing us to build models that can generalize effectively by making them invariant to these biases, which can be introduced in different ways. So that's essentially where mindful AI fits in and why it allows us to build better models essentially. In terms of, you mentioned in the pharmaceutical space and in drug discovery, the way we have to think about this is to go back to the pipeline. So if you think about the drug discovery pipeline, it starts with target identification. So we have to identify which gene targets or which pathways are of interest or could lead to a potentially novel treatment of an indication. So algorithms in this case can be used, machine learning models can be used to predict certain new targets. And this is where we can start putting in the blocks of fairness and mindful AI, where you want to build models which are fair in terms of not being very biased to certain kinds of targets, certain kinds of gene populations, in order to come up with targets which are novel and models which are generalizable. The second aspect of the pipeline is understanding the diseases and mechanisms themselves. So it's in this case, AI can be applied to build models for us to understand how certain diseases interact with other parts of the human anatomy. And for this, putting in the blocks where you have fair and AI which is debiased can help us learn new representations of diseases, lead to predictions which are more generalizable. And then moving on, we can think about the next phase, which is the clinical trials phase. So this is a very interesting aspect where AI and essentially fair AI is very useful to make sure that we are selecting patients, doing recruitment and establishing cohorts in a way which is bias-free. And if we are able to identify patient cohorts and do recruitment and make those decisions in a way such that bias is reduced as much as possible, it can lead to final outcomes which are more effective. And that's essentially the whole gist of mindful AI and how it can be applied to the drug discovery pipeline.
Fantastic. So more neutralized way of doing research and trying to find a solution to this problem.
Absolutely.
Right, right. Fantastic. Great answer. Yeah. So the next one that I have for you is, how does the use of artificial intelligence in healthcare ensures that humans become healthier, live longer, and become immortal, maybe become immortal one day?
Immortality, well, that would be very nice, wouldn't it? So let's think about this one. So the way I would think about this is how different pillars of AI in healthcare and how that can eventually lead to outcomes which essentially will lead to humans being immortal. And I guess one can define immortality in different ways, but to me, immortality would certainly be, the human being resistant to the majority of the diseases which currently kill a human being, or put a human being in a state which is, well, painful.
Right.
So I guess the way AI comes into this and the use of AI in healthcare. So one use case is imaging. So currently there's been a lot of buzz and a lot of applications, and it's actually my prior work at Microsoft Research where we applied AI to imaging problems, and AI has shown to be very effective in this area. So, Jeff Hinton, famously said that we should stop training radiologists now, because in 5 years, deep learning is going to be doing so much better. And in the work which we did on imaging, where we built models which were able to reduce workloads for clinicians for up to 90. So this is really where AI is a game changer. It might not sound very exciting, but AI has the capability of being robust, accurate, and also reproducible. So a clinician at different times of the day or under different workloads or different circumstances might miss certain things, but a robust AI is unlikely to do so. So imaging is a really a big aspect where AI in healthcare can deliver and has delivered great value. And moving on from there, I see the patient engagement and the whole aspect of inverting healthcare as a really great aspect where AI can further progress human outcomes in healthcare. So, currently we have natural language understanding models which are very sophisticated and are being applied to help patients, for example, in their recovery phases. So, better understand better communicate with patients and just understand how they're going through their recovery phases, for example, when they're on the recovery beds, or
Right.
doing remote diagnosis using chatbots. So that's something which is also quite interesting and would definitely push us towards having better patient outcomes. And then finally, the holy grail, which is precision medicine. So, if you imagine in the future, you have an AI which has the complete knowledge of your entire genome, your metabolic profile, how what food you eat, how you exercise, how much you sleep, and have these thousands of data points, then it would be possible to develop drugs which are precise and personal to every one of us. And that's essentially sort of the next frontier of AI in healthcare, is to put these two aspects together, where you have the understanding of the biology and the chemistry, but also combining it with all this massive data that we have around how patients behave in the clinical setting and how patient outcomes look like.
I mean, the third one is the most fascinating one, the one that you said, the Holy Grail. So how would pharmaceutical companies would be able to develop something like this, which is more customized to, let's say, not one or few people, but even to a large population of people who come into a particular bracket, similar biology, similar things or medicines that can go or will work for them. So do you want to talk about that as well a little bit?
Yeah, so that's a very difficult problem to solve
Right.
because the way the drug discovery pipeline
Right.
works is you have to do clinical trials and you
Yes.
have to recruit patients and then understand the drug behaves on those cohorts. So this is really where AI can be very effective, is
Right.
for us to segment different patient populations and predict how they might behave, to have patient populations and cohorts that are much more finer and much more representative of different kinds and different variations and heterogeneity that we see in the human being. And that's really where deep learning models and AI learning the representations of different kinds of data that is used to understand clinical trials is something where AI can really push the boundary. So, for example, in many cases, we might not actually have all the data for all the members in a cohort or all the population. We might be missing some biomarkers or data which is useful in segmenting that cohort. This is really where modern can allow us to actually generate missing data from previously known data and to fill in those gaps. So there's very exciting approaches, generative approaches, and these kinds of approaches which are really pushing and will push the frontier for AI in healthcare and drug discovery.
Fantastic. That's a great point. Yeah. So my follow-up to you is actually based on this question is on synthetic biology. So will in future, with the help of AI or general intelligence, will we be able to achieve immortality based on synthetic biology? Because as today's research scientists have been successfully able to produce cells that can never die in their labs, what if one day they get to a point where science helps us to transform all our cells in some way possible, like perhaps blood transfusion or organ implant? So yeah, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I see you're fascinated by immortality.
Yes, I want to live forever.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, this is very exciting. I am very much
Right,
fascinated by this area. So I'm
right.
not a biologist by training, but in this field is very exciting, and it actually it sort of resonates with the early days of computers and how programming and building applications changed the way way we use computers and how the role which they played in our life. So for
True.
me, immortality is sort of the final milestone. But for us to sort of, I do think that it is inevitable. Eventually, in the scope of time, we will probably get there. But there are a few other milestones which I do think that we will have to hit and will hit to achieve that. So, one, we already talked about precision medicine, so precision
Right.
personalized medicine. Having the ability to build drugs which are very personalized to the different heterogeneity and different in basically the human makeup. But then going forward, what's really fascinating is the
Mm.
whole aspect about programmable sorry
It's all right.
um, programmable biology. So this is quite fascinating. So we've all sort of come across the CRISPR gene editing
Right.
platform, which all researchers want to get their hands on.
Mm.
But much more fascinating work, which is done here, is for aspects such as building biological circuits. So you can imagine a future where we are able to assemble these biological logic gates,
Hmm.
which can react to different changes in the human body and proactively act like living sensors to signal pathways and mimic the actions which naturally occurring proteins do, and essentially be programmable. And that is
Right.
essentially, for me, would be a big milestone, and for us to get to the part where we as a humankind are invariant to the diseases which currently alter our life in very negative ways. If you are
Mm.
able to program these sort of applications, so to speak, and have these proactively react to any kind of mutation or any kind of diseases which do occur in the body, that is essentially what would be a milestone.
Right, right. Fantastic and very, very logical point. Yeah. Great. So let me ask you this question about diagnostic imaging. What is diagnostic imaging in artificial intelligence, and how will it help in improving the health of humans?
Yeah, so diagnostic imaging is basically using computational methods to allow clinicians to help with diagnoses of diseases, essentially. And this can be, for example, also some work at Microsoft Research, which essentially, for example, predicting macular degeneration for eye disease. So using computer vision models to predict in the future how a person suffering from macular degeneration is going to, what the outcome of that is going to be like, and then predicting different kinds of treatments for that. There's also lung, for example, the lung cancer detection. So there's been a lot of success in using techniques to diagnose lung cancer using CT scans. And also all of these sort of techniques are aimed towards using data which currently we do gather in the clinical pipeline, but to actually lead to better clinical outcomes. So, for example, imaging techniques here or predicting, presence of cancer or macular degeneration is all about, speeding up the process where doctors can spend more time on advancing patient outcomes rather than doing things which are very laborious, such
Right,
as looking through CT scans, and also techniques which allow us to be more robust, so not prone to human error, and also techniques which allow us to detect signal in the presence of noise. So, for example, in the imaging, in diagnostic imaging, it's very common for there to be scanning errors or artifacts, and it can be possible for humans to detect patterns among these presence of this kind of noise. But if you think of an AI which has been trained on thousands, if not hundreds of thousands or millions of scans, it can be robust to these artifacts and detect signal in the presence of this kind of noise. So this whole
right,
domain is really about leveraging the clinical data that we do, that is extracted anyways in the pipeline, but then to augment to lead to better patient outcomes.
great. Yeah. Fantastic. So in the field of machine learning, what is graph machine learning? Can you talk about it in the context of deep learning and neural networks? Please also share what is graph ML or graph machine learning used for, and what are its practical implications.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is something which is very exciting for me, and at AstraZeneca,
Right.
this is something which I have been spending a lot of time on. So yeah, I'm very happy to talk more about it. So, so in essence, graph machine learning is building models which are able to learn the representations of graphical data. So if you think about the different data modalities and the models which do exist currently. So you have, for example, imaging models or text models or audio models. The data modality for those for imaging models is some sort of image going in, or for text models is some sort of passage or string of text going in, and for audio is some sort of spectral information going in. So
Yeah.
graph machine learning presents us essentially a set of techniques and tools which allow us to process graphical data. So data which has different actors or different entities which have some sort of relationship between them. So this can be, for example, a chemical structure of a compound, or a social network, or a hierarchical organization chart, for example. And the idea is to build models which are able to learn the representation of these structures and then use them to perform several downstream tasks. So for example, if you are able to learn the representation of a graph, then we can use these techniques to predict new links in that kind of graph. And for example, in drug discovery, these new links could be new targets or new diseases for existing drugs, and so on. We can also extend this approach to classification. So, classifying different labels for different entities in that graph. So you can imagine, for example, in a biological knowledge graph, you have several molecules. You want to sort of classify what sort of attributes a new molecule would have, given your knowledge of other molecules that you have seen before. And furthermore, recently these approaches are also used in recommendation tasks.
Right.
So for things such as recommending movies, where these approaches are very robust and very capable of modeling the complex relationships between different entities in a graph to then perform new recommendations.
Okay.
And in the context of deep learning, this is essentially results in a graph neural network where we have several frameworks, one of which is a message passing framework where through different iterations of training a neural network, you're able to aggregate the information by looking at the states of different entities in the graph. So the model is able to learn to represent entities by sharing the knowledge from different entities across different iterations. And that's essentially what GraphML is and how it manifests in itself in deep machine learning.
Can you also mention what are its practical implications? Like you mentioned recommending in movies, but what else in terms of healthcare?
Sure. So in healthcare, it has very significant uses in the drug discovery scenario,
Right.
because so you have several kind of data sets which are inherently graphs. So for example, as I said, compounds, their chemical structures can be represented as graphs. And also there's data sets which essentially represent the way biological entities relate to each other using knowledge graphs. So for example, the way in which compounds affect different gene targets, or the way in which different pathways are related to different genes, or the anatomy are all knowledge graphs. And we are able to train models on these knowledge graphs, for example, to then predict, for example, the drug repurposing problem, where, given you already have a drug, what are the novel diseases it could be applied to? So these sort of use cases are inherently graph-based, and by using the graph neural networks and similar deep learning techniques, we're able to really harness the relationships, the complex relationships, which is not really possible using the traditional tools that are deep learning tools that are available to us.
Right. Fantastic. Great practical implications that you've shared in drug discovery and several other fields. Great. Okay, so what is the future of artificial intelligence, and how do you see the next 50 to 100 to 200 years going in for artificial intelligence? So it becomes a little bit hypothetical question and a little bit philosophical. Would it change our species forever? Because now we are living more closer to the machines and algorithms than maybe 20 or 30 years ago. And then my question on top of it is, will it be dangerous for us biological humans? Why I say dangerous is not because I have anything against artificial intelligence. I mean, this podcast is for artificial intelligence, but learning from our past, we humans are not very good at living together and enjoying the benefits of transformational technology. So that's the reason why I wanted to ask you, how does it look for the 50 to 100 to 200 years?
Yeah, Vivek, I wish I had some sort of a magic crystal ball to see
Right.
the next 50 or 100 or 200 years. But I think this brings back to a very interesting course I took while I was studying for my master's at Oxford, where it was about policy and how AI will affect different kinds of economic policies or humanitarian policies. And the way I think of it is, I see that AI will change or force us to question the fabric of what it is to be human, and it will force us to ask questions about very fundamental things which we take for granted, such as morality or economic cost of certain things. And that's essentially a very important and and something which is very important to our species. Is at the core of the development of our species, and why having these kind of moral understanding makes us not kill each other, essentially.
Right.
So AI, so for example, you are right, there are very dangerous implications. So, if you think about the uses of AI potentially in the military or in terms of conflict, AI will force
Right.
us, as AI develops further than what it currently is, it will force us to answer questions.
Sure.
How moral is AI in the battlefield? If a self-driving, for example, car hits a person, what is the moral? Who has what is the moral thing to do there? And or for example, if an AI doctor is not able to save a patient, then who has the moral responsibility of this? This is something is quite interesting, and it's something which we will be forced as a species to think about. I see that as AI or artificial general intelligence becomes more mature, I see that there will be a step change, where as a race we will have to decide if AI is something which is just a tool which we want for us to augment our lives and help us with boring things, or is it something that we want to treat as an end? These sort of questions will define what our species looks like. Is it going to be, if it isn't equal, then what are going to be the relationships between a human and AI, and how our species grows? So for me, it's more about questioning the mere fabric of our existence and our species when we think about the next 200 years of AI, really.
I think that's a fantastic point because, yeah, I mean, there will come a point where we need to decide, or maybe we will be forced to, as to what sort of control can be given to the machines. Because, yeah, I mean, it's great to have AI in healthcare because it's saving millions of lives, and it's great to have it in pharmaceutical and self-driving because it saves your efforts. You can do some other work at that time and then be free of driving, and maybe it'll be more precise in not killing people on the road or in managing accidents than we humans are. But I mean, to give the whole control to a machine which might have different goals than us sounds a little bit scary. So yeah, great point. Thank you for sharing that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, so one of the best questions that I always ask on my podcast, and some of my listeners actually love it, is are we living in a simulation? Like Elon Musk said sometime back, we are inside, or we could be probably living inside a simulation. How do we know, that we are in a simulation or not, as per your thinking being an AI researcher?
Yeah, I mean, if we are in a simulation, it's a damn good simulation. So, yeah. But I mean, to answer your question, how do we know, if you're inside a simulation?
Right.
So as a researcher, I always, and as a researcher and an engineer, I always go back to thinking about the principles. And if you think about the principal building blocks of our existence, so we have the human DNA, for example, the genome, all the different constructs that we have, for example, how structured everything around us is. Everything around us doesn't seem that it's due to a chance.
Right.
We are able to derive some sort of explanation to almost all the phenomenon that the human species has come across. And I see that the role of the human species is to answer this question, is to discover, the cause behind the fundamental and principal cause behind all the phenomena that we see, and to build a single answer to, to what is sort of this existence that we are in. Just from putting on this my engineering hat and a principled approach, I would lead to an answer that we are indeed in a simulation, because for something to be so precise and so structured and so mathematical in nature, it must have had to be created. And that's essentially where I'm at in this very controversial debate. But again, one must actually think that, why does it actually matter? if why does it matter for us to know that if we're in a simulation or not? What if the answer was yes? Uh, do we want to, as a human species, find ways to change? What is sort of the end goal? That's always something
Right.
interesting for me to think about, and I'd like to get your thoughts on it also.
Yeah, whenever I ask these questions, from different guests that I bring on my podcast, Jay, all of them sort of share different kinds of opinion. You have a great opinion as well. But I have actually learned it from, I think, one of the podcasts where Joe Rogan said that imagine why are we building great things all the time. If it was a Tesla something 2 years ago, now it's a Tesla Plaid. If it was an iPhone 12 now, it'll be 13 next year. Much better features, bug free, a lot of other cool ideas in it. Why? Even in healthcare, we didn't have good medicines 15 years ago. Now we have precise medicines, and so rapidly rolled out to the world. Why are we doing the best version of ourselves, making everything best all the time? Why are we incrementally going towards something like a goal? So where he mentioned is that this could be added. This could be sort of a feature which is added for us as humans, that we want to reach to one goal, and then sort of whoever has created will take over, say, okay, you've reached to this point, now we will handle it from here, and then the cycle again starts, because we don't know 2-3 million years ago when we started. Before that, what happened? Did we come here by panspermia, or was it a natural evolution of biology under the ocean? So yeah, I mean, it's such a fascinating thing, and that's why I wanted your opinion as well for it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's very fascinating indeed, and I
Yeah.
agree with that viewpoint. Is I feel that as a species, we are evolution is inherent to us, and
Right.
the drive for survival is ingrained in us, and it pushes us, with the aim of pushing the human race forward.
Correct.
And I guess the definition of survival changes as the human race evolves. It becomes more complex and complex, and
Right.
just the push to that is something which forces us to create new technologies and finding new means of survival in the present or in the future. So yeah, so that's very fascinating indeed.
It is fascinating. And the thing is, even if we are living in a simulation and we will not be able to determine whether somebody else is controlling us, maybe that person or that entity might be living in a simulation themselves, and somebody else on top of that is creating it. So, I mean, there are so many hypothetical scenarios and theories about it, and we humans just speculate it all the time. So, yeah. But it's great talk. Okay, so building on to some of the more philosophical questions. One of that is, I mean, it is a bit realistic though, but in future. So I'm an avid reader of and follower of the great theoretical physicist Michio Kaku. Read his books and all. He once said that we should combine with artificial intelligence in the future, because they will be so much exponentially more intelligent than, so fighting with them or debating with them or trying to get the control back or trying to stop them to do something might not be an option anymore. So what do you think about it?
Yeah, so to me, that's something which is far, far away.
Yeah. Yes.
But if I were to, if I were to sort of advise my future self,
Right.
future self, I would think that change is inevitable, and I think we as a species would be less human than we are now as
Mm.
AI and the technology advances. So I totally agree with the viewpoint that there is no point to resist the change, because whatever you call it, the artificial species or however, uh,
Right.
a machine would always have or eventually will have capabilities that are far superior than humans. But that being said, it comes to question that, I guess, a fundamental question which
Mm.
Turing asked is
Mm.
how do you define if an AI thinks? So an AI can be made as sophisticated as possible to mimic, and to even mimic human thought or even mimic human imagination, but can an AI really think And that's something which is very interesting. And I don't think if an AI which if an AI is sort of a machine or biological machine or some kind of machine, as long as an AI hasn't got the ability to think, yeah, I don't think it's a big threat to us. But at the same time, we must never resist change, because change is always going to be there.
Fantastic. Great point. We should not resist it because there are so many companies, and I've actually done podcasts with a few AGI researchers as well. They have founded companies in America based on general intelligence, and as per them as well, it is inevitable. It will come. And to resist and to say that, no, we will live in jungles and let the machines take over the downtowns of cities might not be a logical way to think about it. But I mean, it's too far away. So like you said, I mean, it's too far away. So we don't need to worry about it, but at least we can think about it so that, maybe we can do some safety engineering around it, do set some AI ethics, some protocols that it doesn't just completely go out of hand. So yeah.
Absolutely. As AI researchers, it falls onto us to make sure that the AI that we are building now is responsible. We make sure that the AI is fair, it's not biased, privacy preserving, and all these aspects are very important to us as we look to advance the field of AI research and build models. Because eventually these models are going to be used in daily routine. They're going to be part of our life, and we might as well make sure that they have more benefits than drawbacks.
Absolutely. Great point. Fantastic. So my last question to you, and completely philosophical. What is the meaning of life to you? What is the purpose of us humans in this universe? Why are we even been created? Are we here to solve a purpose like we discussed before? Why do we always look for becoming better in everything? And why this exponential nature of being better at everything that we do? So first, let's talk about what is the meaning of life as per you, and then we'll talk about the getting better part.
Yeah, that's a very interesting question again. So I guess meaning of life to me personally is to become a better version of myself than I was yesterday. And I'm sure, just looking at your question, it's something which is very common to us as a human species. And my reasoning for that is the drive to the survival. So we know, or we have been told through generations, that we have to become better than we are. We have to push the boundaries just for us to survive, because it's not about survival of today or tomorrow, but after. And that's something which I feel is the main driving force for us, is to find new technologies and build as much better future as we can. And yeah, I mean, in terms of purpose of us humans in the universe, it's a very difficult question to answer indeed. But again, I would think that from a very philosophical point of view, it's again, if we are in a simulation and it looks like we are, then for all intents and purposes, we're all probably some sort of computational unit. And one can think of us as self-organizing a unit which pushes to improve itself over and over, just to get better computational results to whoever is running us.
Correct.
But at the very core, I do believe that humankind is driven by the instinct of survival, and we build everything we do is for our survival, not just today, not just tomorrow, but after. And that's something seems to have been quite successful, given that we're all still existing. We're still not extinct.
Right.
I think it's going to be like this.
Fantastic. Absolutely wonderful answer. And I found somebody who now believes like me that we are living in a simulation. So thank you so much. Okay, great. So that's how we end and wrap it up. But just before we do that, do you have any points or anything that you want to share about the podcast or in general, whatever?
Yeah, so Vivek, it was very nice talking with you today, where we covered a lot of very interesting things. Artificial general intelligence,
Right.
healthcare, and morality. And
Yeah.
wasn't expecting to talk about that today.
Yes. Yes.
So yeah,
Fantastic.
this yes, it was great, and yeah, I wanted to ask you, what is your vision for this podcast? Yeah, so how do you see? Is it going to be limited to AI research? Are you interested in talking with other scientists? What is your vision for this? Would be keen to know.
Absolutely. I am. Like the mission and vision is to create more awareness around artificial intelligence. It should not be boxed. I mean, of course, it is not boxed because of the revelation of internet nowadays. You know, anybody can learn what publications you've written, Jay, or somebody else anywhere in the world, right? But still, I feel that, you know, the general population still doesn't, and general population, I mean the non-AI people, but they are, you know, good educated people. So for example, if you go to a CFO or a friend or somebody who doesn't know much about AI, should know, you know, what is going to come for the next 2 to 3 generations, because this is going to be our reality. It's already is a reality. So that's probably like the vision and the mission of this podcast, is to bring more and more awareness, sit with, you know, researchers and scientists like yourself in the field of artificial intelligence, who can bring up new ideas and new sort of viewpoints that can be then spread to millions of people around the world, and they would say, I believe in that, and, you know, I would want to connect with you, and we'll talk about it. And the more we talk about it and the more we discuss, I think that's gonna really make it more morally right and responsible. So yeah.
That's wonderful.
Yeah. Fantastic. Okay, so I had so much fun, Jay. Really, like I always say to all my lovely guests, this has been an honor to have you on the podcast. And if your time permits, we will try to do a second round, and then we'll ask you some more cool questions around AI.
Likewise, it's been an absolute pleasure.
Thanks, my dear. Have a great day.
Okay, you too. Bye.
Thank you for listening to this podcast. Please support this podcast by liking, commenting, sharing it with your friends, and also subscribing to this channel.